Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Stu Hoffman, president of ChiroSecure, and happy to be here in conjunction with Cash Practice. I have Miles Bodzin on with me. And we're going to talk to you a little bit today about considerations in going for cash practice. I have so many of our doctors that have switched to cash because of all of the things they don't like about practice, and almost all of them involve dealing with insurance companies. When I was in active practice, we had a large portion of our practice that was pure cash. But a lot of people talk about cash practices, don't really know what it means, don't know how to make it actually work and stay legal and out of trouble. So, Miles, hey, I'm glad we're doing this together, your company along with ChiroSecure. And I think, we both share in wanting to educate our population out there so that we're more effective as a whole. So you've been teaching this, how to be a cash practice, for so many years now. What have you found have been the biggest obstacles for people in dealing with cash?
Well, thanks for having me, Stu. And I'm real excited to be doing this event with you together to get out to the masses of chiropractors. And this is one of those subjects that I find very interesting in that, when doctors are thinking about going cash, you're right, they have their own motivations, whether it's they're sick of insurance or whether they want to just collect more cash or whether they want to, for me personally, back in the day, it was, I just want to be in charge for myself. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm not going to listen to them. I'm going to give patients what they need and that kind of stuff. Right. But some of the biggest, I think one of the biggest challenges doctors face is just having a lack of clarity about what it means to go cash. What are the responsibilities? And it all starts with mindset. And I know I don't claim to be a chiropractic coach. There's a lot of coaches out there. I'm a software company, but from a coaching perspective, I think that one of the biggest things is doctors just got to get it right between their ears. Like they know they can do it. There's a lot of fear about it. And just once you get the mindset right and you have a game plan, and I often teach this, that for our patients to say yes to us, there's got to be real clarity about what they're getting from us. And I think it's so true for us doctors as well. You had to be really clear on what it is you're doing, what you're going to accomplish, what are the things you must do. And so I think lack of clarity is probably one of the biggest challenges we run into. And that's probably not unique to becoming a cash-only practice. But that's probably true with most everything in life, is having strong clarity around it.
And it is such a perfect segue for me, because we find the phone calls that we take every day are when a doctor is either sued, has a licensing board complaint, an insurance audit, any of the things that they need to actually make a claim on. But even before the claim, since we promote to be proactive and call us when we can help de-escalate something, so many times it is the communication that was lacking that created the upset, whatever that was, to begin with. And so many of the calls that we take over here, a lot of the doctors wind up having a patient wanting to ask them for a refund based on all these different circumstances. And that works a little different as well if it's all cash versus insurance and all of that. But I know that with a lot of the doctors, one of my concerns for them, in addition to communicating, I think having a system, and that's why you and I support each other, having a system that doctors actually utilize to be consistent, to be, in line with what they're allowed to be doing, and basically do the work for them so that you don't screw up and you're still making money doing things that are effective for your practice. And so I want other people to have an understanding that when you talk about the communication behind it, when we're talking about cash, you better be spot on, because I want to hear from you what types of things the doctors think that they resolved going to cash, other than not having to deal with insurance and all the things that surround that. But what experience do you get through the other doctors?
Well, I mean, What the experiences I get are they're happier. Is that what you're asking? Like what are they ultimately the outcome?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share. Ultimately, once they get through the process, they always repeat. They generally say to me, "I wish I did this sooner. I wish I got more cash." And I also want to clarify for the listeners and the viewers right now. I'm not necessarily advocating, even though our company's cash practice, I'm not necessarily advocating you have to give up all insurance. It's a spectrum. We have some doctors who go all the way to 100% cash, and those who do 50-50 and 70-30, and they have a blend in their practice. And I would say that makes up the majority of practices. Most of them start off where they start adding cash and doing less and less insurance, and eventually it's like a progression over time. They get more and more and more, and eventually it gets to a place where they wake up one day going, "Well, I guess I don't really need the insurance because we're making so much money cash wise. Our practice financially isn't dependent upon it." But speaking to your question or your comment regarding communication, I believe it all starts with that. It all starts with how good are you at communicating, and not just how good are you at it, but are you hitting the key points that need to be discussed in a cash model? Are you addressing fees properly? Are you addressing discounts properly? Are you addressing your what patients are getting from you properly? There's a whole, I mean, it's an 8-hour seminar to go into that topic, to teach it. But in essence, from the standpoint of what the doctors are coming out of, is they feel a real sense of clarity between having the two pieces, and that's why we say we're software and training. Another way you could say the systems and training, that you have a system in place that just follow the system. And if you follow the system, it's going to keep you compliant. It's going to keep you not just compliant, and that's just a piece of the puzzle, but it's also a successful system that when you apply it, you actually have more success in practice. And it creates a lot of clarity between you, your responsibility, the patient, and the patient's responsibility. And that clarity creates a win-win situation. And then you couple that with really good communication so that you're not getting the phone calls as to the scenarios you're bringing up where doctors are getting themselves in hot water. And many times those hot water scenarios, I'm sure you agree with this, is that it's over communication. There was a lack of communication somewhere. There was a disruption between that, and the patient ultimately, I want my money back or something of that nature, and it turns into a financial conversation. And I know from the standpoint of board complaints and malpractice claims, finances usually gets in there. It's usually one of those top reasons that suddenly, they're like, that's why they're suing. Like they're going to sue ultimately, I'm going to guess, because they want to get some kind of reward out of it, some kind of repayment out of their what they think went wrong. And we want to obviously prevent that.
Well, think about the fact that every patient is simply a relationship that you're either creating or maintaining. And in all relationships, upsets, the number one upset stems from money.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you guard that aspect of your relationship with that person, of your relationship with that person as sacred, you will be very conscious of being authoritative about what your fees are, what they need from you, and what you're recommending. But you'll also have empathy for them at the same time.
Absolutely.
Being sensitive to their needs and ability and to pay and everything else. And when back in my day, I had to create all of this because we had our own system, but it was all manual, in writing, paper, and we needed to make sure that people understood exactly what they're getting, why they're getting it, how much they're getting, what it cost, what if they stop care, what if we dismiss them,
right.
And what if there's a break in care? Because that's one of the things that I do get calls on from doctors is they had a patient under what they would call maintenance care, wellness care, any of the buzz names of today. And the patient gets in an auto accident. So now, instead of charging them $20 an adjustment, because it's cash and I don't have to do anything, now it's $180
right.
a visit to the insurance company. Someone's going to have a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so having some sort of mechanism to be able to deal with this communication cycle, as I'll call it, in an effective and clear manner is critical.
Absolutely. It's not only critical to have that communication where you're pre-managing future expectations, exactly that scenario where, hey, Stu, if you ever get in a car accident, I want to, the situation is going to change, or whatever that conversation is, so that it's preemptive, so the patient knows in advance. But also, it's not just the conversation, it's also making sure your fee structures are set up properly. And, that, again, that's a whole seminar in itself. I will say this one thing that often comes up about a cash practice, and this might take the conversation in a little different direction, but let me just bring it up. And that is, it's weird for people to hear me say this, but I'll just say it. And that is, there's really no such thing as a cash practice. There's no such thing as a cash fee. Doctors need to just be aware that what you have is a practice that you see all patients. The question is, are you accepting their insurance or not? Because I think you'll agree that if a patient comes in and they're paying you cash, they may have insurance. Maybe you just don't accept assignment and you're giving them a super bill. So you might think of yourself as a cash practice, but in fact, what you are is a practice that just doesn't accept assignment. And that brings up the subject matter that doctors, if you have patients who are submitting claims on their own outside of your practice, you're held to the same level of responsibility from the standpoint of note-taking and documentation and coding and billing and all the other things that go along with running an insurance model practice. You're held to the same level of responsibility as a doctor who is as someone who is accepting insurance if you're not accepting it. So, just from the standpoint of I often say that the thought of as I'm freeing myself from all the headaches of dealing with that, it's almost a fantasy of that nature. Yes, you're not dealing with it in day-to-day life. It's not in your practice, but you're still got the responsibilities of it if you have patients who are, and you most likely are, having patients who are submitting claims on their own outside of your practice. That generally is the case.
If the doctors watching get nothing out of today other than this conversation that you started about documentation, cash versus insurance, let's get to that, because that is a hot one on this end of the desk. So all the time I get two things. Well, I'm an insurance practice, but no, you're not. Your patients are sending the bill into insurance. You are still an insurance practice. As you said, you're just a practice that doesn't accept assignment from insurance companies. And then the other call is, well, I don't have very good documentation. It was just a cash patient. Well, number one, insurance companies don't set the standard of your documentation. Your state licensing board sets that standard. And if your patient winds up with an upset and makes a complaint in 2 nanoseconds on Google, or the insurance company does, you are going to get sanctioned one way or another, because you did not live up to the responsibility that you signed on for when you paid the bill for your license. And that is so critical. And second, it does not get you out of, let's call it post-payment reviews, insurance audits, because your patient may be submitting, and if they are, the patient and the insurance company have a right to see your justification for anything that you did on behalf of that patient. And if you can't justify it, you shouldn't have taken the money, and they're entitled to it back. Whether the insurance company won't ask for it back from you, but they'll suggest asking the patient back for the money while they suggest that they get it back from you. And it puts you in a very bad light with that patient and word of mouth. So doing this with a clear understanding of what you're getting into is key. It's great, but you better understand how the game works in order to play in it. And I'm glad that you shared that about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll often say this, and I've heard others say it as well. And that is, if we're randomly looking through your records in your practice, I really shouldn't be able to tell the difference between a cash and insurance or work comp or a PI patient. Maybe their history will give me a little clue, but from the standpoint of if I look at their account ledgers, they should look pretty much the same. I shouldn't see difference. I shouldn't see difference in the level of documentation. Now, I know in real life practice, I get it. When we have a cash patient, we're not necessarily thinking to the same levels we are when we have to prove to an insurance company to justify some code. And I get that in a real life. So I'm not trying to, be the bad guy here. I'm just simply stating that, it doesn't free you from the shackles of dealing with everything. You have to take responsibility for those things. And that's where the big misnomer is. And that's kind of like, they talk about, oh, download this free ebook on the 5 myths of something. Well, one of the myths of being a cash-based practice is that it frees you from having to do any responsibility of things. And that's just not the case. So you got to be aware that, if you're running your when you're running your cash patients, the fees are the same. Yes, the way you discount those fees may be different according to the different rules out there. The way you document, the way you code, no upcoding, no downcoding, diagnostic codes, all that stuff needs to stay the same. Now, it could be run a little simpler, but nonetheless, you still got to check all the boxes. You got to make sure you check the boxes in those areas. So, and again, our 2 companies, obviously we're dealing with more of from a standpoint of compliance and dealing with keeping you out of trouble between our 2 companies talking right now in this interview. One of the other subject matters I want to bring up that's common, and this isn't just unique to cash practices, but it's all practices, and that has to do with the world of credit cards. And I know before we got on, you asked that I bring the subject matter up, and that is credit card fraud. It's one of these topics that a lot of doctors aren't aware of it, but I'm sure you've gotten reports of it. I know I have, where doctors have had tens of thousands. I know of one office that had over $100,000 embezzled from them through their credit card, through credit cards. And doctors might be going, well, how does that happen? What's the problem with credit cards? Well, there's 2. As a doctor, you have to protect yourself from 2 arenas. One is fraud from patients, and another arena is fraud from staff. And the fraud from patients is, people coming in with, counterfeit credit cards, or coming in with stolen credit cards, that type of stuff. You hear a lot today about chip terminals, EMV terminals that people use chip cards. I just want to touch on that one real quick, just briefly, because it's a really simple subject. And that is, from the standpoint of those terminals, the purpose of that is to prevent someone coming in using a counterfeit credit card. That means it's literally a fake credit card. They got it from somewhere else. They bought it over the internet or something, and it's a fake credit card. And chip terminals prevent the use of that. Well, doctors, I got to let you know that even though we recommend you get chip terminals, it's a recommendation, it's not a requirement, but the odds of you as a chiropractor having someone walk into your practice with a counterfeit credit card to buy an adjustment are pretty remote. The odds are, if someone's going to go through the headache of getting a counterfeit credit card with $1,000 of value on it, they're going to go to Best Buy and buy something of electronics. They're not going to come to your chiropractic office. So yes, it's good to have. Is it the end of the world if you don't have one? It's not. I mean, we're in the business of providing this for people. So here I'm telling you, you really don't need it, but if you want one, they're available. They're nice to have, and oftentimes patients want you to have them because that makes them feel a little more comfortable as well. Really, the area of fraud that doctors aren't aware of is fraud from internal sources, maybe a staff member or something of that nature. And I'm not here to throw any staff under the bus, but these are the stories I've heard. So here's examples of where fraud happens in your office. You have a staff member who is looking to steal from you, and the way they do it is they take your credit card terminal, which is just a standalone plug into the phone jack credit card terminal that you buy, you get from Costco or whatever. And that terminal allows you to run refunds on it. And the way it'll work is patient will come in and pay $50 for an adjustment. And then that staff member will run their own credit card for a $20 refund or a $30 refund. And they can run that refund against that credit card because there's nothing preventing them from it. There's no PIN number you have to enter to run a refund. And that's sort of like going to the ATM machine and pulling money out of your bank account. And you might be asking, well, of course I would see that as a doctor. How would they get away with that? Well, unfortunately, I would say a good portion of doctors never look at their merchant statements. They just never do the accounting. They never look them over. And as a result, they're not reconciling it. Now, if you're reconciling this stuff, of course, you would catch this very quickly. But if you're not reconciling your statements, it's very easy for someone to run $20, $30, $40, $50 refunds on their own credit card or friends' credit cards. And then they go to the ATM machine and they withdraw that money off the credit card. And you may not notice it in your deposits because maybe you ran $1,000 of payments that day. And if it was a $50 refund, you see a deposit in your bank account of $950. So you're like, all right, I got my money. But because you never reconciled it, you never catch that discrepancy. So one of the things we teach is you want to avoid having any kind of credit card terminal in your office that is not connected to software that controls its capabilities. Meaning if you just get a standard off-the-shelf credit card terminal, I could take it home, plug it into my phone jack, and use it all day long and run refunds and things of that nature. But if you have a terminal that's connected to software and that software controls the activities on that terminal, as well as you can maintain control what staff members are allowed to do, that's a great way of preventing that type of theft. That's a really, that's one that I've heard stories of over and over and over and over. Another one I hear of, and I'll just mention, and I'll keep it real short here, and that is doctors will go and say, well, I'm going to use a product like Square. And I'm sure Square is a good product. I'm not here to throw them under the bus. But the problem with a product like Square, or the challenge with that type of product, is you don't set up your own merchant account. You're using what's called a shared merchant account. So Stu, if I was working for you in your practice, and your practice was called Hoffman Chiropractic, and I came and worked for you, theoretically, I could go on to Square website and I could open up a merchant account. It's not really a merchant account, but I can open an account to run credit cards called Hoffman Chiropractic. I can create that account because they don't verify the business name. And because of that, I'm working in your practice now, and a patient comes in and they hand me their credit card. And at the front desk, instead of swiping on your terminal, I swipe it on my Square phone. And as a result, I get now $50, and the patient sees a receipt that says Hoffman Chiropractic. And as far as the patient's concerned, it was a legitimate charge because that's what shows up on the credit card statement. And you're no wiser because you're not seeing the money, and I now just collected the money. So having a product like a Square in your office, that could be open up a can of worms of all kinds of theft going on in your practice. Yeah. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to what are the ways a patient can steal from you, and what are the ways a staff member theoretically can steal from you. And unfortunately, more commonly, it's staff that we have to be concerned with, that there's something going on that you're making it easy for someone with not great ethics to do something, to embezzle from you.
So the moral of the story is, you're running a business. Be in it so that you know what's going on. And you know, people out there, I can hear them saying, yeah, right, that'll never happen to me because I pick great people and I this and I that. I have heard from some of the smartest people I know horror stories when it comes to finances in their office. So let's pay attention to that. The only other thing that I wanted to add for today is for the doctors to understand that, you know, I mentioned board complaints, licensing board complaints. That's the first thing. A lot of patients, when it comes to their care in the office, will threaten a doctor that if you don't refund me or do this or do that, I'm going to sue you. Well, don't panic so quickly. Don't react. It's better to be responsive than reactive. And that's the time to call your malpractice carrier. Hopefully it's us, and share with us the situation so we can walk you through a way to de-escalate it. Because, you know, I get calls nonstop about refund requests. You know, I always ask them, did you ever ask your medical doctor? And this, sarcasm aside, it has to be dealt with. And there are right ways to deal with it, and there are risky ways. So if you're ever in any of these situations, because it still comes back to the beginning of our entire conversation today, something can go wrong, usually in your communication with somebody. And if it does, and it comes back at you, that's an important time to remember that something did go wrong, and it's time for you to reevaluate what you addressed, where you're at now, and then come up with an appropriate response so that you can de-escalate anything that shows up rather than let it escalate into it. And so the last question I want to throw out before we end today, because this has been great, and I'm glad we got together to do this. We've talked about it for so long.
Yeah.
But care plans, you know, and prepays, they're, again, I did it 35 years ago, but there's a lot of doctors that get concerned, at least the chatter out there. Can these even be done legally? And I knew when I first started out, I actually went through all the things that I found to be necessary in agreement with the patient in order to make sure doing these things are legal. Tell me more about how the doctor should be confident and comfortable with what they're doing.
That's a great question. And, whenever I get asked a question about legality, I'll just clarify, I'll give my disclaimer. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to give legal advice per se. But from the standpoint of, what doctors can do when prepays, I also want to bring up before I address it head on, I just want to say this, and that is, people automatically assume that prepay is the model that is best out there, or that what we advocate per se. And I'll just put it out there. It's not necessarily what I advocate, our company advocates. It is an option for a small select group of people and within our practice. And what I teach often, and I'll answer your question here just in a moment here, but I just want to pre-frame it. And that is, among the population of people that come and see this is a little practice management tip. And that is, about 95% of our patients that come into our practice are not interested in prepaying. I'll just point that out right out. That's not what they do in their life. They don't prepay for cars. They don't prepay for furniture. They put everything on monthly payments. That's the way 95% of the population, at least here in America, operates. There's about 5 to 10% of the population you see that's how they operate their life. They prepay for things. That's how they proactively make their decisions about anything they purchase. If they're going to buy a car, they write a check for it. That's just who they are. Those are the people that you'll never have problems typically with prepay, because that's how they operate their life. Where the challenge becomes things is, doctors, when you have been in a report of findings and you somehow sell the patient on the idea of doing a prepay, whatever report of findings style you do, whether it's that's a whole subject in itself, but whatever you're doing, you're getting the patient to do something they wouldn't normally do. And anytime you get a person to do something they wouldn't normally do, there's always a little part of them that's not happy about it. So if you get someone to prepay who normally would not do that, now you run the risk of, well, they're not sure about it. You have run the risk of buyer's remorse. You run the risk of these other emotions. Now you open yourself up to that conversation that down the line is, well, I didn't want to do that to begin with, and you told me something that, I'm not happy with, and now I want to get my money back. So going all the way back, peeling back the layers as to what causes these complaints. Yeah, we can look at down the road what happened. Maybe they didn't get results, or there was a lack of communication, or there was missed expectations. That's usually what it is, where they have certain expectations that aren't being met, or certain assumptions, and you have certain assumptions, whatever it may be. But if you peel back the layers, really what it is you're getting a person to make a decision to do something they wouldn't normally do. And oftentimes it's being done when they're in an emotional state. Right. And anytime you get a person, this has to do with the study of behavioral psychology, where I'm going with this, that anytime you get a patient or a person to make a decision while they're in an emotional state, and that decision results in them doing something they don't normally do, you really run the risk of creating problems down the future. This is why, for example, the people have such a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to buying timeshares, right? There's this reputation that you go to these timeshare programs and they will, they twist your arm to buy these things. And there's so many people after the fact that are unhappy about it. And you see commercials on TV about attorneys saying, are you unhappy? We'll get that money back for you. And they're marketing to that audience. So to address your question as to getting to the prepays and legality of it, yes, there are some states that frown upon it. I'm not necessarily which ones they are at the moment. There are also, but here's the way I'd like to answer it. Doctors, if your mindset is you want to do prepays, my answer to you is you want to explore, I believe you should explore a different alternative, which is make prepays an option, but the vast majority of your patients should not be prepaying. The vast majority of your patients should be on a monthly payment, which greatly reduces the scenarios of where people are asking for refunds because they're paying it monthly. They're not paying it in advance. And one of the benefits we've seen, and I know we're running long here, so I'll wrap it up with this. One of the benefits we see with a monthly payment versus a prepay is that you have much higher patient compliance, much higher patient retention, much better follow through with their care. That's something we've observed in practice after practice after practice. When we compare the PVAs of different practice styles, prepay practices tend to have a higher PVA than the average practice out there. They tend to be in the neighborhood of about 60, 70 visits on a prepay practice. But on a practice that's doing monthly payments, we see those PVAs cross over the 100 mark, where these are patients who've been with you for years and years and years and years and years on maintenance care, and they continue on. And that's just an observation. Now, I'm not here necessarily saying that's what you need to do in practice. I'm just simply saying from a observational standpoint, we see practices having better success of keeping their patients happier longer when they're on a monthly payment versus a prepay. So I'm not sure that answers your question perfectly the way you wanted it answered, but I just wanted to go down the path of I don't want to leave the assumption that prepay is the answer. It's a thing out there. I just don't think it's the right model for 95% of our patients out there. The patient who wants it will ask for it. They'll ask for it.
I think that's something that maybe we'll come back at some point in the future to explore even further, because I think that most people would have thought before you just made your explanation that monthly is still prepay. Because, it is in a sense. So we don't really have time to go into it all today, but your point is well taken, certainly to me, that if you're squeezing them to prepay their entire year in advance, there's going to be challenges down the road. So I appreciate it. I thought that this was great today. And I think that if anyone cares about this topic, this would be helpful to have heard what we had to share. And we'll do more in the future as we can get together, because that's not always the easiest either. But, we support cash practice, and we wouldn't be on together if we didn't support each other. So I look forward to, everyone continuing on their path. If you have questions, we'll post information on how to get to us. But just remember, cash practice, how hard is that?
And I want to say also, I'm sorry, I spoke over you just now. I apologize. Right. I want to say to anybody watching who is a cash practice client, make sure you reach out to ChiroSecure. When you have questions in regards to whether or not you're about your policy, I'm sure you'll answer whatever questions they have. I'm going to assume you will. And reach out to them. They're a wonderful company, and they have our back from a chiropractic perspective for sure.
Thanks, Miles.
Yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
everybody, have a great day.